So just 1 minute ago, federal prosecutors dropped an absolute bombshell, 127 new criminal charges against Donald Trump. We're talking about the largest single indictment against a former president in American history. And if that wasn't wild enough, Warren Buffett, the Oracle of Omaha himself, just broke his decade-long silence on political prosecutions with a statement that's sending shockwaves through both Wall Street and Washington. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching this unfold in real time. This isn't just another legal headache for Trump. We're talking about potential exposure that could fundamentally reshape the 2026 midterms, derail his political operation entirely, and set precedents that will define presidential accountability for generations. And trust me, when Warren Buffett feels compelled to weigh in on a criminal case, we've entered completely uncharted territory. Let me fill you in on what's been happening behind the scenes. So Donald Trump has been facing legal challenges since he left office in January 2021. And honestly, it's been a constant barrage. From the moment he walked out of the White House, prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions started circling. We've seen indictments in Manhattan, investigations in Georgia, federal cases related to classified documents, and inquiries into January 6th. But here's where things get interesting. Trump has managed to delay, obstruct, and fight nearly every single one of these cases, using every legal trick in the book to push proceedings past election cycles. His strategy has been pretty straightforward. Stall everything, claim political persecution, rally his base around the narrative that he's being unfairly targeted, and hope that either winning back the White House or maintaining control of the House would give him enough leverage to make these problems disappear. For a while, that approach seemed to be working. Cases dragged on. Judges granted delays. Appeals stretched timelines. Trump's legal team managed to create enough procedural chaos that nothing was moving at the pace prosecutors wanted. But here's where the rubber meets the road. We're now in March 2026, and the landscape has shifted dramatically. Democrats took back several key state legislatures in the 2024 elections. Special prosecutors have been methodically building cases for years, and they finally amassed enough evidence to move forward with something unprecedented. Reports from around March 11th, just hours ago, revealed that the Department of Justice, working in coordination with state-level prosecutors, has filed 127 additional criminal charges spanning financial fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and violations of the Presidential Records Act. Talk about strong words. This isn't a supplemental indictment adding a few charges to an existing case. This is the entirely new legal offensive that fundamentally changes Trump's exposure. Federal prosecutors made sure to announce these charges publicly, making it clear that they have documentary evidence, testimony from former Trump Organization executives, and communications that directly implicate Trump in systematic criminal conduct spanning from 2017 through 2024. This announcement sent shockwaves through the Republican Party because it raised all sorts of questions. If Trump, the presumptive frontrunner for the 2028 Republican nomination, could be buried under 127 new charges with trials scheduled to begin before the midterms, what did that mean for Republicans scrambling to maintain their narrow House majority and defend vulnerable Senate seats? Now, this isn't the first time we've seen Trump face serious legal jeopardy. Trump's ability to evade consequences really only extends as far as his political utility. Whenever the legal walls start closing in, he's quick to claim witch hunts and rally his base. We've spotted this pattern time and time again. Just think about how he turned on Jeff Sessions right after Sessions recused himself from the Russia investigation. Trump absolutely destroyed Sessions publicly, calling him weak, disloyal, and the worst mistake of his presidency. Sessions had been one of Trump's earliest and most loyal supporters, a senator who stuck his neck out when it wasn't politically safe to back Trump. And the moment Sessions followed the law and recused himself, Trump treated him like a traitor. Sessions ended up resigning in disgrace, his political career essentially over. Then there was William Barr. Trump wasn't pleased when Barr refused to claim the 2020-2020 election was stolen. Barr had been Trump's most reliable shield at the Justice Department, killing investigations, spinning the Mueller report, and generally acting more like Trump's personal attorney than the nation's top law enforcement officer. But when Trump needed Barr to validate his election fraud claims, Barr looked at the evidence and said publicly there was no widespread fraud. Trump immediately turned on him, calling him a disappointment and suggesting Barr didn't have the courage to fight. Barr resigned shortly after, and Trump spent months attacking him as a coward. And let's not forget how he distanced himself from Mike Pence when Pence refused to overturn the election results on January 6th. Pence had been the most loyal vice president imaginable, defending Trump through every scandal, every controversy, every outrageous statement. But when Trump demanded that Pence violate the Constitution and reject electoral votes, Pence finally drew a line. Trump's response, he sicked a mob on him, literally. Trump supporters stormed the Capitol chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," while Trump sat in the White House watching it unfold on television and did nothing to call them off. Pence's life was in danger, and Trump's only concern was that Pence hadn't delivered the outcome he wanted. Even Kevin McCarthy faced a similar fate when he admitted Trump bore responsibility for January 6th in private recordings. McCarthy had crawled back to Mar-a-Lago, humiliated himself to get back in Trump's good graces, and dedicated his speakership to protecting Trump at every turn. But the moment those recordings leaked, showing McCarthy acknowledged Trump's culpability, Trump made it clear McCarthy was expendable. Within months, McCarthy was ousted as Speaker, and Trump didn't lift a finger to save him. Now, it looks like federal prosecutors are in the hot seat. This pattern is becoming all too familiar. You can show all the loyalty in the world and defend Trump every single day, but the moment you step out of line or cease to be useful, he'll toss you aside without a second thought. Prosecutors, judges, and legal institutions are now the ones standing between Trump and total impunity. And Trump's strategy remains the same: attack, delay, and delegitimize anyone who dares to hold him accountable. So, what did Trump do to bring this avalanche of new charges? Well, it all boils down to a systematic pattern of criminal conduct that prosecutors have been documenting for years. The impasse happened because Trump's legal team wanted to suppress evidence and claim executive privilege, while federal prosecutors were trying to follow the paper trail of financial crimes, document destruction, and witness intimidation that allegedly occurred both during and after Trump's presidency. Ultimately, Trump just kept obstructing, and prosecutors decided enough was enough. As the subject of these investigations, Trump decided to take an aggressive stance. He filed motion after motion to delay proceedings and refused to comply with subpoenas for documents and testimony. His approach seemed to be just run out the clock, make everything so complicated and drawn out that prosecutors would give up or the political landscape would shift in his favor. At first, many legal observers thought this strategy might actually work. Trump appreciates aggressive legal tactics and the notion of never backing down, never admitting fault. But here's where things started to go wrong. But as the investigations dragged into their third and fourth years, some serious issues started cropping up. Key witnesses started flipping, providing testimony under immunity deals. Financial records that Trump claimed were protected by privilege got released by courts. Documentary evidence that had allegedly been destroyed turned up in raids on Trump properties. While Trump's team were steadfast in holding their ground, predictably, the public began to see a pattern of obstruction that looked increasingly damning. Polls indicated that Americans were increasingly frustrated with Trump's refusal to comply with basic legal processes, even among some Republican voters who were getting tired of the constant drama. This was the moment Trump began to sweat a little. You see, Trump values appearing strong, staying in control, and overall maintaining the narrative that he's a victim of political persecution. He doesn't want to be tied to systematic criminal conduct that's actually provable in court with documents, testimony, and forensic evidence. That's definitely not the vindication he seeks. And then Trump went ahead and made a move that, according to prosecutors, was a serious misstep. Trump started exploring ways to cut a plea deal and figured he should maybe cooperate on some lesser charges to make the bigger exposures go away. He even considered accepting a deal that would keep him out of prison but ban him from holding federal office. But then when Trump's hardcore base caught wind of all this, he absolutely lost it. In his supporters' eyes, even considering a plea deal is just a sign of weakness, cooperating with prosecutors. That's pure betrayal. Any Republican who dares to suggest Trump should accept accountability is instantly labeled a rhino traitor. Now, this left Trump in a tight spot. On one side, he really needs his base's backing to maintain his political operation, fundraise off these legal battles, and position himself for 2028. The MAGA movement will drop him like a hot potato if he shows any sign of capitulation to what they see as a corrupt justice system. On the flip side, he actually has to deal with the reality that 127 new criminal charges carry serious prison time if he's convicted on even a fraction of them. That means figuring out how to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison, protect his business empire from total collapse, and preserve some kind of legacy beyond first president convicted of multiple felonies. The tricky part is all of that requires some level of cooperation with prosecutors in accepting that he committed crimes. So Trump is caught in a bind. He can either keep fighting every charge, which means trials that could go on for years, daily headlines about his criminal conduct, and mounting legal bills that are already draining his campaign coffers and making the MAGA narrative harder to sustain. And that only makes his 2028 prospects worse and paints Republicans in a bad light as the party still defending a convicted criminal. Or he can do the rational thing and negotiate some kind of resolution, which means admitting guilt on at least some charges. But that'll definitely make his hardcore base turn against him and fracture the Republican Party between those who still worship him and those who are desperate to move on. It's a tough situation, and that's the mess Trump creates for Republican leaders. He demands complete loyalty and wants them to defend him without budging, but then he points fingers when his legal jeopardy becomes their political liability. He's not shy about tossing them under the bus whenever it suits him. This whole scenario is causing major stress within the Republican Party. If federal prosecutors have decided Trump is no longer too politically powerful to fully prosecute and are willing to pursue 127 charges knowing the political firestorm it will create, every Republican office holder is left wondering if defending Trump is still politically viable. Those moderate Republicans who are trying to balance loyalty to Trump with electability in purple districts are now worried sick about being dragged down by association with a defendant facing well over 100 criminal charges. Meanwhile, the MAGA-deards believe anyone who isn't defending Trump 24/7 isn't loyal enough and that establishment Republicans are too quick to abandon their champion. Things became even more intense when Mitch McConnell, one of Trump's most complicated relationships, essentially refused to defend him on these new charges. McConnell had been walking a tightrope for years, sometimes enabling Trump, sometimes pushing back, always calculating what served Republican electoral interests. McConnell had been pushing for the party to move on from Trump for months and criticized Trump for putting the party in impossible positions. When someone as calculating and powerful within the Republican establishment as McConnell starts distancing himself, the political ground is shifting. McConnell's refusal signals that at least part of the Republican leadership sees Trump as more liability than asset. What makes this moment particularly unusual is the quiet entrance of Warren Buffett into a discussion he has historically avoided. For more than half a century, Buffett has been remarkably disciplined about staying out of direct commentary on criminal prosecutions or partisan legal battles. As the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, his public remarks have almost always focused on economic fundamentals, long-term investment thinking, and the health of American institutions rather than the legal fate of individual political figures. Yet on March 11, shortly after news broke of the new indictment against Donald Trump, Buffett released a brief but notable statement. True to his style, the language was careful and restrained. He did not speculate on guilt or innocence, nor did he engage in political rhetoric. Instead, he spoke about principles, something he has always considered the foundation of both democracy and capitalism. Buffett emphasized that accountability under the law is essential to the trust that allows markets to function. In his view, capitalism ultimately depends on confidence that contracts are honored, that rules are enforced consistently, and that no individual, no matter how wealthy or powerful, operates outside the legal framework that governs everyone else. Buffett noted that when institutions apply the law evenly, markets remain stable because investors trust the system they are operating in. But when that perception weakens, when people begin to believe that power can override accountability, confidence begins to erode. And in Buffett's worldview, confidence is the invisible asset that underpins the entire economic system. Without it, capital becomes cautious, investment slows, and institutions gradually lose credibility. That is why his decision to speak at all drew so much attention across boardrooms and financial circles. Buffett is known for thinking in decades rather than election cycles. When someone with that perspective comments on an issue touching the rule of law, investors tend to view it less as political commentary and more as a reflection on institutional stability. In essence, Buffett was reminding the public of something simple but fundamental. Markets thrive not because of any single leader or political party, but because the legal and democratic structures surrounding them are trusted to function fairly. Legal scholars have also begun weighing in on the scope of the charges. Jonathan Turley of George Washington University, who has previously defended Trump in various legal debates, noted that the scale and documentation described by prosecutors could place the former president in a far more serious legal position than previous cases suggested. According to Turley, the determining factor will ultimately be the evidence presented in court. If prosecutors can substantiate even a portion of the allegations with documentary proof and credible testimony, the legal exposure could become difficult to dismiss as purely political conflict. From a broader perspective, the story unfolding now goes well beyond the fate of a single political figure. It raises a deeper question about how a constitutional system manages accountability at the highest levels of power. The United States was designed with a structure of checks and balances precisely to prevent authority from becoming absolute. Presidents hold enormous power, but the founders also built mechanisms to ensure that the presidency itself remains subject to law. That principle matters not only for politics, but for economic stability. Investors and businesses plan decades into the future, and they do so under the assumption that institutions will continue to operate predictably. If the public begins to believe that rules apply differently depending on power or status, the long-term consequences extend far beyond any single trial. The credibility of the system itself becomes the central issue. As the legal process unfolds in the coming months, the ultimate outcome will be determined in courtrooms rather than political arenas. Evidence will be examined, arguments tested, and juries asked to decide the facts. For observers in business and finance, the real question is not merely what happens to one individual, but whether the institutional framework that supports American democracy continues to demonstrate its ability to function impartially. Buffett has often said that the strength of the United States lies not in any particular leader, but in the resilience of its institutions. Moments like this serve as a test of that belief. The trials have not yet begun, the evidence has not yet been publicly examined, and the final outcome remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The coming months will offer an important measure of how the American system handles power, accountability, and the rule of law when the stakes are unusually high.